Hi. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's good to be back. Well, I'm looking at myself. Let me close this. I'm gonna look at the camera. I'm going to try for minimal editing in this video. I've already tried to film this like a dozen times, and it has not worked out, I must say. I'm very, very rusty. I'm going to try for minimal editing because I know if I have to sit down with this later on and I'm going to edit a bunch of stuff, I'm not going to want to do it, and you're never going to see it. So, hello, and welcome back. Or I guess, I don't know, more welcome back to myself. I don't know if I'm necessarily back yet. I'm back for the moment, at the very least. I'm back for this video, and I'm very glad to be here. I miss this. I miss talking to you guys about books, and I'm hoping that I can make this a monthly thing again. At the very least, a monthly thing where I come back and tell you what I've been reading, what I've been up to. No promises, but I don't know. I would love to keep doing this. I feel like making booktube videos right now. I feel like reading. I feel like doing all this, so hopefully you'll see me. I can't make any promises, but hopefully you'll see more of me. I have about a dozen books here to show you. I haven't been reading very much since the last time I saw you, which I just realized looking at my channel the other day for the first time in a while. I haven't been here in literally over a year, which seems about right now that I think about it, but is also kind of crazy. And in that time, in that year, I've only read maybe 24 books, if that. It's definitely less than 30, more than 20 maybe, but not very much at all, honestly. I just go for weeks, not weeks, months without reading, months and months without reading, and read for like a couple weeks, back-to-back books, couple weeks, and then just months and months of no reading after that again. It's happened already this year. Earlier this year, I read several things, and then just for months and months did not read anything, and just started reading again like a week ago. But now I feel like reading again. I don't feel like a reading slump's going to happen again, but you never know. So we're going to forget about some of the stuff that I read last year, and some of the stuff I didn't get to talk about with you. Just going to go for this year, 2018. What have I read so far this year, since the beginning of this year? What have I read? That's what I want to show you. That's the dozen or so books I want to show you right now. This is not going to take very long. I hope I'm not going to spend too much time on any of these. I really don't want to. I really just show you what I've read and if I liked it or not, basically. And that's it. First thing is Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Did I like it? Yes, I did. I loved it. I did start this actually in November of last year when I got it. I got it from Tor. Thank you very much, Tor, for that. I wasn't expecting it, and I really appreciate that. I'm really sorry that I didn't get to reviewing it right away or talking about it right away, but hopefully now that I'm talking about it, that's okay. I really, really love this book. I love the other two books. I actually read the other two books back to back right before reading this one so I could remember them going into this one, and I really loved that experience of reading all three of these sort of within a 4-month period. That was really nice, and I highly recommend it. This book, I say all that because I don't think it was this book's fault that I stopped reading it halfway through and then didn't pick it up again until like January, but it is a little bit slower. I don't think it's its fault that I stopped reading it, but it is a little bit slower than the other two. I will say that. I think if you like the other two, which is the audience I'm really talking to right now, is people that have already read the two, because if you haven't already read the other two, then you won't read this one yet. But just know, for anyone that's already read them or is planning on reading them, this book is a little bit slower. But there is a ton of information you get in this book that is so good. There's so much to be learned about what you want to learn about in this book. And for that reason alone, I had just as much fun with it as I did with the other two. The next book that I read is Legends of On by Kel Cade, and this is the third book in the King's Dark Tidings series. And I've talked about the series quite a bit on my channel before. In the past, I did a full review of the first book when I first read it. I love the first two books in the series, and I liked this one maybe a little bit less than the other two, but it still was a lot of fun, and I quite enjoyed it. The series I don't feel like is for everyone. There's quite a lot of ridiculousness involved with the main character. The main character is really overpowered. He's a little bit over the top. The entire cast of characters is just swooning over him the entire time. But there's a reason for that, and that reason is like actually tied into the plot and the background of the character. And when you read it, when you get more into it, it kind of makes sense. There's a weak point to this series in the beginning with the female characters. The writing of the female characters is a little bit weak, but definitely gets better as it goes along. There's this great female-male friendship that you hardly ever see, just platonic friendship you hardly ever see in books like this. That's really great to see, and yeah, I love the series, and I definitely recommend you give it a shot. It was self-published originally by the author, the first 2 books were, and then picked up by Podium Publishing later for audiobooks. And it's narrated by one of my favorite audiobook narrators, Nick Podell. He does a fantastic job in this one, and I highly recommend you check out the series if you just love really, really over-the-top, fun fantasy audiobooks. And I say audiobooks specifically just because I've only ever listened to them before. So, and speaking of really just fun fantasy audiobooks, well, I have the physical book here because I backed this on Kickstarter. Michael J. Sullivan, The Disappearance of Winter's Daughter, the new Rhea Chronicles book. I got this paperback edition and a signed bookmark from him from backing the Kickstarter. And even though I did end up reading it on audiobook, this was just as good as all the other ones. I love the Rhea books. I love the Rhea Chronicles books. You can read each one of them individually if you want to, or read them in order. I personally recommend reading them in order, but they do stand alone on their own. And this one was no different than the rest. Royce and Hadrian are still a ton of fun, and if you've read all the other ones, I highly recommend it. If you have not read all the other ones, I highly recommend you do that, and then read this one, because it was just as much fun as all the other ones. Like I said, we're doing this really quick, showing you the book, telling you whether I liked it or not, moving on. The next book that I read is called World of Tomorrow. And this book is actually a historical fiction that revolves around these 3 brothers from Ireland. 2 of the brothers that were still living in Ireland get involved in some trouble and end up having to flee to New York City, to where their 3rd brother lives. And they are kind of pursued there by an assassin who is hired to find and kill them for whatever hijinks that they had gotten into that caused them to go to New York City in the first place. This takes place during World War II, during the World's Fair in New York City in 1939, June 1939. So it's a lot of fun. It's really good. I really, really enjoyed this a lot. I love the writing in this book quite a bit. I was just in the mood for historical fiction, specifically New York City historical fiction, and so I picked it up and read it and really enjoyed it. And speaking of New York historical fiction, after that, I read The Alienist by Caleb Carr. I actually originally bought this because I had heard about the TV series that they're going to be coming out with, that it's already come out, and I haven't even watched yet. And I don't necessarily know if I want to watch because well, first off, I'll say that I love this book. I loved it a lot. And now after watching previews of the series, I don't think I'm really that interested in watching the series, just because I like the book so much. I don't want to ruin it by watching the series. Anyway, I don't know if the series is actually good or not. Maybe it is, but I love this book. It was a lot of fun. This is set basically at turn of the century New York City, late 1800s, early 1900s, about this serial murder that's been happening with these kids. These basically child prostitutes are being murdered. This journalist, who is the main character, the voice, the person whose perspective it is told from, he kind of teams up with an alienist, a person who, here, I guess I'll just read what the front of the book tells you what an alienist is, so you know. Prior to the 20th century, persons suffering from mental illness were thought to be alienated not only from the rest of society, but from their own true natures. Those experts who studied mental pathologies were therefore known as alienists. So basically follows a journalist and an alienist trying to solve these murders. And it's a great setting. I love the setting a lot. I loved the writing a lot. One of the main characters is Theodore Roosevelt, and that was really cool. I really liked this book a lot, and I highly, highly recommend it for people who like that setting and who like that time period and who like this kind of story, a murder mystery story. And I did pick up the second book, The Angel of Darkness, recently as well. I bought it. I haven't started reading it yet. I'm probably going to start reading it maybe even within the next week or so. I want to start and hopefully finish it. And after I read The Alienist, I was actually so excited about Theodore Roosevelt being a character and learning about Theodore Roosevelt. And I found him to be really interesting in the book. And I had already had this kind of inclination building up within me to start reading biographies, or at least trying to start reading biographies. So I picked up these 2 Theodore Roosevelt biographies. They're by the same person. This one is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, and this one is Theodore Rex. This first one follows his early life, kind of up until right before he became president. He became president, and then this follows his presidential years. And then there's a third book in this sort of trilogy about him, called Colonel Roosevelt, about his years after the presidency. And I loved these. I loved the experience of reading these. This is the first time I've ever finished a biography, and I really loved both of them. I can't wait to read the third one. It was fascinating reading about Theodore Roosevelt, and I finally see why people like biographies and why they read them, because they're just really fun. I don't know. These ones were, at least. Maybe it was just the writing. Maybe it was the person I was reading about. But I really want to read more biographies now, which is something I've never really thought I would want to do before. So I thank these books for that, and I'm really excited about that. And I highly recommend these two books if you're looking for books about Theodore Roosevelt. They're very dense, but they're very well written. They don't feel dense when you're reading them, but there's a lot of information. You're just learning about every detail he could possibly fit into these, and that's why there's 3 of them for each different stage of his life. And I highly recommend them if you're looking for Theodore Roosevelt biographies, but take that with a grain of salt. That's coming from someone who's never read biographies before and has never read a Theodore Roosevelt biography before. But for someone who's never done those things before, I really like them a lot. They're by Edmund Morris, by the way. I never even said that. Rise of Theodore Roosevelt and Theodore Rex, both by Edmund Morris. And then going back to a little bit of fantasy, I listened back to back to these 3 books by Robin Hobb. Ship of Magic, Mad Ship, and Ship of Destiny. This is the Liveship Traders trilogy. I love these. I loved these so much. These are 3 of my new favorite fantasy books of all time. I read, the first trilogy of hers, the Assassin's Apprentice, Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest trilogy. I read that trilogy and really liked it, but this trilogy I just could not get enough of. I read these so quickly, and they were exactly what I wanted at the time. Ships that are alive, sailing on those ships that are alive, this like coastal town, dealing with its issues, with there's pirates in it. There's so much in them that I loved. I would love to talk more at length about these. I don't want the video to be too long though. If you haven't already picked these up, you can read these separately from the other trilogy or any of her other books. I highly recommend you try them if you like that kind of thing. If you like stories that are set where a lot of it is set out on the open sea on ships, which I have always found that I love. I haven't read nearly enough books that are like that, but every single book that I've read like that, I feel like I've loved, and these were no exception. They were incredible, and I can't wait to read more Robin Hobb. There's there's like a quartet of books that kind of take place right after these that are sort of related to them. These really had me wanting to just move on right to that quartet that just kind of takes place right after these in the same sort of vein as these. But I kind of fell into a reading slump again right after, and I lost my holds at the library on them. I did listen to these on audiobook, even though I do own the physical copies of them, obviously. I read them on audiobook, and I plan on listening to the next ones on audiobook as well. I don't even know what the series is called, the quartet, whatever. I can't wait to read them because these were just fantastic. And then I also read a book called Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This book was super bizarre and super weird. I did not know what to expect going into it, although I'd heard so many good things about it beforehand. It was self-published originally, and then Orbit picked it up to publish, and I'm so glad that they did, and that it's finding an even bigger audience because I loved this book. I listened to it on audiobook again. Basically, there's this Tower of Babel. It's this like really awesome steampunk, huge, epic tower where each floor is just like its own society. Each floor has its own rules and laws and culture, and there's just so much happening inside this tower, and people from all over go to visit it. There's tons of people surrounding it. Some people don't even ever go in it. They just kind of congregate all around it. There's just tons of people all around it all the time. This guy named Senlin and his wife go to it, and they get separated. That's the premise. They get separated, and he can't find her, and so he has to like search the Tower of Babel for her, and it was great. The next book I actually have an audiobook already. I have not read it yet, but I plan on doing so very soon because this one was fantastic, and I highly recommend you pick it up. And then on a trip that Giselle and I took, we read this, Half Magic by Edward Eger. We had like a 2-hour trip, so 2-hour trip to this place and back. We listened to this book on audio on the way there. It's about these kids who, whenever they wish for something, it happens, but half of what they wish for happens, and it's hysterical. Giselle and I had a lot of fun listening to it. I now want to read all of these books. He has a ton of books like this that are all very similar. I actually have a book called 7-Day Magic from when I was young that I apparently read. I didn't even realize was a part of this like series he's written, and they all involve, well, I don't know if they all involve these same children, but they're all sort of related to each other. And I had apparently read that when I was younger and loved it. And this one I also really, really liked and had a lot of fun reading with Giselle. And these are some of her favorite books. Edward Eger is one of her favorite writers, and she just grew up reading him. And I'm really glad that we got to listen to this together. And I highly recommend it as a very fun sort of children's fantasy book. And then last but not least, the book that I just finished reading that has kind of gotten me out of my reading slump is The Outsider by Stephen King. I posted about this on Instagram. By the way, follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I know I have not historically posted there very much, but I hope to remedy that going forward. If I don't post this on this channel, I would very much like to post more on those two places, just so you know. So follow me on there if you want to. But I posted about this the other day that I was reading it. I picked it up, read half of it in one sitting on the day it came out. Basically, I got through this very, very quickly. I could not put it down. The premise is that this boy is found murdered, and all of the evidence points to, well, a very substantial amount of evidence, I should say, is pointing to this one guy being the culprit. But there's a ton of other evidence saying that he was somewhere else completely when it happened, and it's proven that he was somewhere else when it happened. So, like, how is he in two places at once, kind of thing? And it's really compelling. I found it to be very hard to stop reading because I just had to know what happens next, and that hasn't happened with me for a book for a while, and hasn't happened with me for a Stephen King book for a while. This book is a standalone, but is sort of related to the Bill Hodges trilogy. I didn't know that going into it. The Bill Hodges trilogy is probably one of my least favorite things by Stephen King. Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. Especially because the third book just kind of out of left field, out of nowhere, becomes supernatural when the other two books weren't in the slightest. This book has a character in it from that trilogy and has a moment where you kind of, if you haven't read the trilogy, you might be really confused. I do think it stands alone on its own, but be wary that if you read it and you get to this one section where they start to kind of reference things that happen in those three books, you may need to have read those three books to understand it. I don't know. I didn't like that aspect of it, but overall, I really, really love the book, and it's probably my favorite Stephen King book that's come out since Dr. Sleep. Anyway, that's it. I'm about to run out of space on my memory card because I've tried to film this so many times. I feel good having been able to do this, finish this, and sit down and actually talk about these things, and hopefully you'll see more of me, like I said. I really appreciate you watching this. I hope it wasn't too painful to watch. I know I really flew through those for the most part. I didn't really talk about them much at all, and what I did say was probably nothing much. I probably said the word awesome and fun and like that kind of thing over and over again, and I know how annoying that is, but it's good to be back regardless. I'm going to try harder to be here more. I really appreciate you guys watching this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you very soon with more.